Hey guys, Scott here. Today I want to talk about the grimoire and Dashslop. So the grimoire, real quick, is a community feature where we are essentially controlling what the next killer is going to be. I guess not next killer. It's going to be more like a year away because they have to actually make it, and they've said that it takes about a year to make a killer. So this is something we're going to get in the future, but the community is basically choosing aspects of its power and what type of killer it's going to be. So this brought up the discussion and recurrence of the term Dashslop. Now, as a little aside about the phrase slop, I originally was kind of annoyed by it. It just kind of gave off the vibes of like an elite movie critic just going like, this Marvel movie is driveling slop and good days. Like it just had that overall just smug vibe. So I kind of hated it. But now that I'm seeing it used like ironically and more in comedic ways, it's actually starting to get pretty fucking funny to me. Like I heard people describe Souls games as roll slop, and I was like, okay, that's pretty funny. I get it now. So Dashslop is the term we're talking about here. I'm not sure who coined it. I think Pixel Bush claims to have coined it. Whatever, either way, I actually think it's a pretty funny phrase now. But Dashslop is basically those killers that have a fast movement ability, typically in a straight line. You know, about half the killers in the game kind of do this. And it is considered slop because it's a safe, effective strategy that most people will enjoy in some way. It's just a very safe thing to do. Which is fair because that is true. Most of the most liked killers in the game, like Billy and Wesker and stuff like that, especially to go against, are Dashslop. It's used in a derogatory but kind of self-aware manner to where we kind of acknowledge, yeah, but most of the fun killers do have some type of variant of that. When I say fun going forward in this video, I'm trying to talk about universal fun for the entire game, because there can be like control-based killers that are fun to play as, but they're almost impossible to make them fun to go against, and that's kind of what I want to talk about here. So the four categories that we had to choose from were basically stealth, control, torment, and Dashslop. So it seems like Dashslop has been removed from the running, and it is not going to be a dash killer, which is fine. Honestly, I like them. I think most people prefer them over most killers, but we've kind of had a lot of them in recent memory, so I don't really mind a break and them trying something else. The thing I was really worried about was them going with control. Stealth, I think you can make fine. They're typically not super fun to go against, but they're fine. You can definitely make them way more enjoyable than a lot of other categories. Torment as well also has potentially interesting implications. Sometimes it can be annoying, but sometimes it's interesting. Plague is a really good example of a torment killer. You have an actual affliction and a side objective. You need to factor in when you're going to cleanse, if you're going to cleanse, is she camping, and then I need to be healthy, to save. Like, so that's the side objective that you have, and that's kind of what torment is. There's typically an affliction involved. So that is, Plague, for example. Again, Dash is just Wesker, Billy, Blight, any forward, and 50 killers in the game that are like that. At this point, you know what that is. Stealth, Wraith, Ghostface, Myers, killers that get their hits based off of not having a terror radius. They typically have a lot less to do in a chase once it starts, but their initial hit is a lot freer than other killers because they can sneak up on people way more easy. And then there is control, the most hated category. There is not a single control killer in the game that is seen as fun to go against for survivors. I'm not going to pretend that nobody doesn't like Trapper or something like that. The whole point is, in terms of making the most fun possible in the game, control is always at the bottom. Again, there's some psychos that like going against Old Score Merchant. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't exist, but for the most part, control is the hardest to make universally fun. And the reason is, when you're designing a control killer, usually the control is in control of the killer. The killer dictates when these things are going to happen. Let's compare it to, again, like Wesker, just generic Dashslop. He's basically John Dashslop at this point. When Wesker is at a loop, say a TL wall, you round the corner, Wesker uses his first dash to go there. You now both have to make that decision. Is he going to commit to his power on me right now? But I'm facing the window. If I juke, he vaults the window and he's going to feel terrible about himself. Do I not juke? Is he going to expect that? The Wesker needs to go, is he going to stay in front of the window? Is he going to juke? Do I need to wait? Like, you've got his second window to do this unless you've got egg or something like that. So those are the interactions happening, and this happens multiple times per chase for everybody. Everyone is making conscious decisions to impact their skill on the actual match, and you need to read each other as it's happening. It goes beyond 50-50s. It's more analyzing the player you're going against and making an educated guess on what they're going to do based off of their behavior previously in the match. So that's what makes them interesting to me. And that's what makes it interesting to a lot of people. And that's why it is slop, because everyone kind of, at the very least, tolerates it. It's just safe and fine. And that's a proven formula to make things interesting to go against in DBD. And they're usually fun to play as well. When you have something like Torment, that can still be fun in some ways. But the thing is, most of these categories are not just the only category that a killer actually has. There are very few that are just dash, that are just stealth, that are just torment, or that are just control. When you have a killer that is just one of those things, they're typically terrible. Like Trapper, perfect example. He has control. That's it. He has no other things that help him there. And because of that, he's terrible. Wesker is not just Dashslop. He has a bit of torment in him as well, because he has an infection mechanic that's a side objective. You need to conserve your sprays. You need to waste time doing it. That gives built-in slowdown and things like that. Pig, for example, has sort of a Dashslop ambush attack, but also a built-in torment. There's an affliction you have to cure. You have to deal with that mechanic. So most killers don't have just one of these, and I think what we're going for here is determining what's the predominant aspect of it. Just because it seems like we're settling in on torment doesn't mean there won't be some form of movement ability or dash or some form of stealth. They might have some other supplemental power. This is just going to be the predominant aspect of them. Like Plague is predominantly torment, but she also does have a pretty good chase power when she does have her actual corrupt purge up. So it's usually a combination of these things. But the problem with control is you don't really get to have everybody in the lobby exert their influence over the game. Let's go over Trapper. Again, perfect example of a killer that is simultaneously miserable to go against and just shitty. So everyone's miserable. The killer is miserable because he's playing a weak killer and he's getting rolled, and the survivors are miserable because he's just not interesting at all to go against. What is the counterplay against Trapper? If you're getting chased, the counterplay is hope that there's not a hidden trap in some grass. That's it. That's really what you do as a survivor. If you're being chased by a Trapper, you either just run in a straight line to where you can see there are no traps, which is boring, but safe, or you try to actually loop and do the only interesting you can do as Survivor and just hope that this is not one of the many loops that he has trapped. Again, doesn't make Trapper strong. He's weak as shit, but that's not interesting at all. The Survivor is not really exerting anything over the match, and it's entirely up to the killer. Now, playing as Trapper can be fun. Having a web set up and corralling people into it, that can be satisfying for sure. But again, when I talk about fun, I'm talking about making it as much fun as possible for everybody. That's what you have to do. Why would you not design a killer to be as fun as possible for everyone? If the killer's having fun and the survivors were having fun, why would you not aspire to do that? When you make a control killer, you're typically only focusing on the killer aspect, and for Survivor, it's almost impossible to make that fun. Now, I've heard people say, like, for Trapper, you can have a Survivor as counterplay, just follow the Trapper, kind of, and just break his traps, and that's a form of counterplay, because you're playing something else. You're not just doing the standard DBD loop. You're following a killer and breaking his traps. But I would argue that's also boring as shit. You're just walking next to him and then holding M1 on a trap, and it goes click, and then you do it, and again. That's also fucking boring. Like, there's still no interesting way to do that. Old Skull Merchant, there is no interesting way to do that. Hag, there's no interesting way to do any of the things that these control killers do. I just don't see a world in which you can make that fun to go against ever. Again, I know some people that play these killers have a bias and then actually don't mind going against them, just like I have a bias for Nemesis. I think Nemesis is super fun to go against, despite the fact in the back of my mind, I know he's really not fun to go against, but because I love Nemesis so much, it kind of changes my perception of him. People that play Skull Merchant and Trapper and Hag and any of these control killers might think that the killer's fun to go against, but at the same time, they know in the back of their mind, this shit is terrible. It's not fun to go against. So that's my problem with control. I think control is the worst of these categories, and frankly, it just doesn't work in a game like Dead by Daylight. Any of these other categories can be acceptable. It seems like Dash will not be, you know, they called it relentless, but Dashslop will not be the killer that's going to be chosen with this stuff. It seems like we're settling in on Torment, and I think that's fine. We haven't really had a Torment-based killer in a while, and I think that is perfectly acceptable. As long as we don't get control, that's really the only thing I care about. Stealth can be fine, Torment can be fine, Relentless can be fine. Control, I think it's pretty much an unsalvageable category, and I'm glad at least people have seen that. It didn't lose by that much, 25 versus 30. Kind of crazy in my opinion. It's like when we look at the history of what the control killers have been, they have all been the most miserable things in the game to go against. I don't even know why 25% of people would vote for that. That's crazy. I think it's just Dashslop fatigue. combined with wanting just something different. But Torment seems to be what we're going to get. That's interesting. Again, it's going to have Torment and probably some other supplemental power as well. But I do think the theme, which is basically like a biblical angel type thing with a form of like torment or mental anguish or something, or like a fear mechanic. It's like a, it's one of those biblically accurate angels you can't look at because it's terrifying. Like all that shit. That seems cool as shit. I think that's awesome. So that is really, really neat, and I think we can have a very successful killer with that category. Basically, in summary, I'm just glad Control didn't win. I'm fine with Dashslop not being a thing for a while. We've gotten a lot of it recently, but Control, this category should never, ever win. Anyway, I'm curious to hear what you guys think about this whole discussion about the next killer. I know a lot of people, especially people like Pixelbush, will be like, but I can describe how Old School Merchant's very fun to go against, and we'll have a battle for the ages forever and all that good stuff. But curious to hear what you guys think. I think Torment should be fine. Thanks for watching. See you next time.